Detective Ray Harrison stopped mid-sentence, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips as he stared at the 911 dispatch screen. The caller ID showed Dorothy Wellington, the same grandmother who'd been bothering them for 3 days about her missing grandchildren. It wasn't another hysterical plea for help. It was a rancher reporting 4 dying children in the Arizona desert protected by a massive Brahman bull. The dispatch officer's hand trembled as she reached for the emergency medical alert button. Files scattered across Harrison's desk as he lunged for his radio, his chair crashing backward into the wall. Harrison remembered Dorothy's weathered hands clutching a crumpled photo of 4 sick children just yesterday morning, the same morning he'd dismissed her as a desperate old woman chasing conspiracy theories about billionaire kidnappings. "Get every ambulance to Grid 47 Delta, now!" Harrison barked into his radio, his throat tight with the realization he might have just found 4 bodies instead of 4 survivors. Who abandons dying children in 120-degree heat? And how long before the desert claimed what remained of his conscience? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Dorothy Wellington counted her last $15 in quarters and dimes, spreading the coins across her kitchen table like a desperate prayer. The eviction notice lay beside them. 48 hours to vacate the $200 a month trailer that had become home after she'd sold her house to pay for her son's cancer treatments. Outside her window, the Phoenix sun beat down mercilessly on the trailer park where broken dreams came to die. Her 4 grandchildren slept fitfully in the cramped back bedroom, their labored breathing a constant reminder of time running out. 8-year-old Lily's leukemia had returned with a vengeance. 7-year-old Mason needed a lung transplant that insurance deemed experimental. Grace's tiny heart struggled with each beat, while 5-year-old Noah's kidneys were failing faster than doctors had predicted. The medical bills had already reached $2.3 million, a number so astronomical it might as well have been written in a foreign language. Dorothy had once managed a small-town bank, understanding numbers and financial responsibility. She'd followed every rule, paid every premium, believed in the system that promised to catch you when you fell. But when her son died, leaving 4 terminally ill children, she discovered that the safety net had gaping holes big enough to swallow entire families whole. "The good Lord never gives you more than you can handle," she whispered, echoing her mother's words. "But he sure comes close sometimes." Her arthritic fingers traced the edges of the final medical bill, another $847,329 for this month alone. The children needed transplants, medications, round-the-clock care that no crowdfunding campaign or church bake sale could ever cover. 50 miles away, Emma Walsh stood in her empty barn, running her weathered hands along Titan's massive neck. The 2,000-pound Brahman bull was all she had left of the ranch that had been in her family for 3 generations. Her husband's medical bills had claimed everything else before he'd taken his own life in this very barn 2 years ago, unable to face another day of financial devastation. Titan's black coat gleamed with reddish-brown markings in the morning light, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting an unusual restlessness. For 3 days, he'd refused his feed, pacing the fence line and staring southwest toward Phoenix with an intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. Bulls didn't have premonitions, the veterinarian had assured her, but Emma had learned to trust her instincts about suffering. In his gleaming 47th floor office, Richard Steinberg reviewed quarterly reports while sipping coffee that cost more than Dorothy's monthly food budget. The tech billionaire's empire stretched across artificial intelligence, pharmaceuticals, and medical research, built on the foundation of calculated decisions and ruthless efficiency. 3 years ago, he'd lost his only son, Michael, to a rare blood disease, despite having access to the world's best medical care. That loss had crystallized his philosophy. Sentiment was expensive, Evolution didn't apologize for the weak, and sometimes loving meant making the hard choices that others couldn't stomach. His Steinberg Foundation donated millions to children's hospitals, but the fine print contained clauses that most desperate families never noticed until it was too late. Dorothy's hands shook as she dialed the Steinberg Foundation for the third time that morning. The business card crumpled from her sweaty palm. She'd seen the news story about Richard Steinberg's latest $10 million donation to Phoenix Children's Hospital, and desperation had given her the courage to call a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. Steinberg Foundation, how may I direct your call? The receptionist's voice was professionally warm but distant. I need to speak to someone about my grandchildren. They're very sick, and I saw on the news that Mr. Steinberg helps children with medical. Dorothy's voice cracked, the words tumbling out in a rush of hope and terror. I'll transfer you to our medical assistance department. The hold music was classical, elegant, nothing like the country radio that had been the soundtrack of Dorothy's working-class life. She waited 23 minutes, watching the children sleep through the thin trailer walls, before another voice came on the line. This is Jennifer Martinez, Mr. Steinberg's executive assistant. I understand you have a medical emergency involving children. Dorothy told her story. The leukemia, the heart defect, the failing kidneys, the impossible medical bills. With each detail, she felt pieces of her dignity crumbling away, but maternal desperation bulldozed through pride. Mrs. Wellington, this is indeed a tragic situation. Mr. Steinberg personally reviews all critical cases involving terminal children. Can you be at our offices tomorrow morning at 9? The next morning, Dorothy borrowed her neighbor's 15-year-old Honda, its air conditioning long dead, and drove the 43 miles to downtown Phoenix. The Steinberg Tower rose 47 stories into the desert sky, its blue glass surface reflecting the morning sun like a monument to modern achievement. In the marble lobby, security guards in expensive suits escorted her to a private elevator that rose so smoothly she barely felt the movement. Richard Steinberg's office occupied half the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Valley of the Sun. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and somehow cold despite the desert heat outside. What struck Dorothy most was what wasn't there. No family photos, no pictures of the children his foundation supposedly helped, just abstract art and gleaming technology. Richard entered with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. He was 52, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Dorothy's annual income. His handshake was firm but brief, his eyes calculating as they assessed her worn dress, the only good one she had left. Mrs. Wellington, I've reviewed your case file. 4 children, all with terminal conditions, medical costs approaching $3 million. He spoke about her grandchildren like they were numbers in a spreadsheet, but Dorothy was too desperate to be offended. They're good children, Mr. Steinberg. They don't deserve this. Their daddy was a mechanic, worked hard every day until the cancer took him. Their mama couldn't handle losing him and just gave up. I'm all they have left. Richard nodded sympathetically, but something in his eyes remained distant, almost clinical. Mrs. Wellington, I understand your desperation. I lost my own son 3 years ago to a rare blood disease. Despite having access to the world's best medical care, we couldn't save him. Dorothy's heart lurched with unexpected compassion for this powerful man. I'm so sorry for your loss. Then you understand. I understand that sometimes loving someone means making the hardest possible decisions. Richard's voice had taken on a different tone, softer but somehow more dangerous. Mrs. Wellington, I'm prepared to take full financial responsibility for your grandchildren's medical care. All of it. the surgeries, the medications, the ongoing treatment, everything. Dorothy's knees nearly buckled with relief. She gripped the leather chair for support, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Oh, Mr. Steinberg, God bless you. I don't know how to thank you." "There are, of course, certain conditions." The word conditions hung in the air like a storm cloud, but Dorothy was drowning, and this man was throwing her a life preserver. "Anything. Whatever you need. The children will need to be transferred to a specialized facility in Montana, where they can receive the most advanced treatment available. This facility deals exclusively with cases like theirs, terminal children who need intensive, round-the-clock care." Montana. That's so far. "Mrs. Wellington, sometimes the best medical care requires sacrifice. You want what's best for them, don't you?" Dorothy nodded, though something in her gut twisted with unease. "Of course, but when can I visit them?" "The treatment protocol requires minimal outside contact for the first 6 months. Any disruption could jeopardize their recovery." Richard's assistant appeared with a thick contract. "I know it seems harsh, but we've found that children recover faster when they're not reminded of their previous circumstances." Dorothy stared at the contract, the legal language swimming before her eyes. She thought of Lily's pale face that morning, of Mason's labored breathing, of Grace's weak little heart, of Noah clinging to her when the dialysis machine beeped its warnings. 6 months seemed like forever, but forever without them would be unbearable. "I need them to live, Mr. Steinberg. That's all that matters." "Then we understand each other." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes as Dorothy signed her name on page after page, each signature feeling like she was signing away pieces of her soul. Meanwhile, at Emma's ranch, Titan had broken through the reinforced fence for the second time in 3 days. Emma found him standing on the highest hill of her property, his massive body silhouetted against the morning sky, staring intensely toward Phoenix. His nostrils flared as if he could smell something carried on the desert wind, something that made his muscles tense with an urgency she'd never seen before. "What's got you so spooked, boy?" Emma approached slowly, her voice gentle. Titan had been her husband's pride and joy, a gentle giant despite his intimidating size. But this behavior was completely unlike him. The bull turned to look at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and for a moment Emma could have sworn she saw something almost human in his expression. Worry, determination, maybe even fear. He pressed his massive head against her shoulder, a gesture of affection that had always comforted her since Tom's death. But today, instead of comfort, she felt only dread. Titan's agitation reminded her of the way he'd acted in the days before Tom's suicide, as if the bull could sense tragedy approaching long before humans recognized the signs. "Something's coming, isn't it?" she whispered, running her hands along his neck. "Something bad." Titan's low rumble seemed to confirm her fears, and Emma made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, boy. If you need to go somewhere, I'm coming with you." She had no way of knowing that 50 miles away Dorothy was climbing into a luxury medical transport van, watching her 4 grandchildren being loaded on stretchers, or that the van's GPS was already programmed for coordinates that led nowhere near Montana. Dorothy stood beside the gleaming white medical transport van, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the team load her grandchildren onto stretchers. The vehicle looked more like a luxury ambulance than the basic transport she'd expected, with tinted windows and expensive medical equipment visible through the open doors. But something felt wrong. Terribly, inexplicably wrong. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead medical coordinator, avoided Dorothy's eyes as she supervised the loading process. Sarah was 42, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of tired lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and impossible decisions. She'd lost her medical license 2 years ago after a surgical error that cost a 7-year-old boy his life, and the malpractice settlement had left her drowning in debt. "Dr. Chen," Dorothy called out, her voice shaky with maternal instinct. "They look so pale." "Are you sure they're strong enough for such a long journey?" Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted Noah's IV line. The 5-year-old's kidney failure had progressed rapidly, and he should have been in intensive care, not loaded into a van for a cross-country trip. "Mrs. Wellington, I assure you we have everything under control. The facility in Montana is equipped to handle any complications." But as Sarah spoke, she couldn't meet Dorothy's eyes. The $100,000 Richard Steinberg had promised her would clear her debts and pay for her legal fees to restore her license. All she had to do was transport 4 terminally ill children to a specialized facility. She'd told herself it was legitimate. Steinberg was a respected philanthropist, after all. Only this morning had she discovered there was no facility in Montana, only coordinates to a remote location in the Sonoran Desert. Lily, the 8-year-old with leukemia, opened her eyes weakly as they secured her stretcher. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm scared." Dorothy rushed to her granddaughter's side, grasping the small, cold hand. "Baby girl, you're going to get the best medical care in the world. You're going to get better." "Will you come see me?" The question hit Dorothy like a physical blow. The doctors say I need to wait a little while, but I'll be thinking about you every second of every day." Jake Morrison, the van driver, was a former military medic who'd been discharged after developing PTSD from his 3rd tour in Afghanistan. He needed the money. His daughter's autism therapy wasn't covered by insurance, and his wife had left him when the nightmares became too much to handle. Steinberg's people had offered him $50,000 for what they described as a specialized medical transport. They'd shown him legitimate-looking paperwork, medical credentials, and a route that supposedly led to a cutting-edge treatment facility. But as Jake loaded the last of the medical equipment, his combat-trained instincts screamed warnings. The medical supplies were mostly empty boxes. The oxygen tanks were nearly empty. And the GPS coordinates they'd given him didn't match any hospital or medical facility he could find online. "Ma'am," Jake said quietly to Sarah, "I need to see the medical facility paperwork again." Sarah's face went pale. It's all been cleared through the proper channels. Mr. Steinberg's people handled everything." Mason, the 7-year-old with respiratory failure, began coughing violently, his small body convulsing on the stretcher. Dorothy moved toward him, but Sarah blocked her path. "Please, Mrs. Wellington, we need to get them to the facility immediately. Every minute we delay puts them at greater risk." Dorothy looked at her 4 grandchildren, Lily with her bald head covered by a cheerful pink scarf, Mason struggling to breathe even with the oxygen mask, Grace so tiny and fragile she looked like a porcelain doll, and Noah, whose swollen abdomen showed how his kidneys were failing. They were all she had left in the world, the only family that mattered. "How long until you reach the facility?" Dorothy asked. "Approximately 8 hours," Sarah lied, knowing they would never reach any facility. "And they'll call me when you arrive?" "Of course," another lie that tasted like poison in Sarah's mouth. As the van pulled away, Dorothy stood in the parking lot waving until it disappeared around the corner. She didn't know she would never see her grandchildren alive again if Richard Steinberg's plan succeeded. 50 miles away, Titan had broken through Emma's fence for the 3rd time that week. But this time was different. This time, the massive Brahman bull didn't just pace restlessly, he headed directly southwest with the determined gait of an animal with a specific destination in mind. Emma saddled her horse and followed, her unease growing with each mile. Titan had never behaved like this before. His usual gentle temperament had been replaced by an urgency that seemed almost human in its intensity. She'd raised cattle all her life. had an instinctive understanding of animal behavior, but this was something entirely different. The bull moved with surprising speed and purpose across the desert terrain, pausing occasionally to lift his massive head and test the wind with flared nostrils. It was as if he could smell something in the air that Emma couldn't detect, something that called to every protective instinct in his powerful body. Meanwhile, in the medical transport van, Sarah made a discovery that turned her blood to ice. Hidden beneath some paperwork, she found Jake's real orders, printed emails from Steinberg's assistant with GPS coordinates that led to an abandoned stretch of desert 127 miles from Phoenix. The instructions were chillingly specific. Leave subjects at designated coordinates. Provide minimal water, depart immediately, and maintain radio silence for 24 hours. Jake, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. We need to turn around. What are you talking about? We're already 2 hours out. This isn't a medical transport. She couldn't say the words aloud, couldn't admit to herself what she'd become complicit in. These children are going to die. Jake pulled the van to the side of the highway, his hands shaking as he read the real orders. In the back, the 4 children dozed fitfully, their small bodies fighting battles they were too young to understand. Jesus Christ, Jake breathed. What have we done? Sarah looked at the children. Lily's peaceful face, Mason's labored breathing, Grace's tiny hand curled around a stuffed bear, Noah's swollen little belly. She thought about the boy who'd died on her operating table, how his parents had looked at her with such trust before she'd made the mistake that ended his life. She'd told herself that this transport job was her chance at redemption, a way to help sick children while earning the money she needed to restore her career. Instead, she'd become something worse than a failed doctor. She'd become a willing participant in murder. We can't do this, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I don't care about the money. I won't be responsible for killing 4 innocent children. But Jake was already consulting the GPS, seeing how far they'd traveled, calculating how much trouble they were already in. Steinberg had people everywhere, lawyers, politicians, law enforcement contacts. If they turned back now, they'd face charges for kidnapping. If they continued, they'd be accessories to murder. Either choice would destroy them, but only one choice would destroy 4 children who'd never hurt anyone, who were guilty of nothing more than being born into bodies that were failing them. In the distance, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, moving steadily in their direction. Neither Sarah nor Jake could have imagined that the cloud was being raised by a 2,000-pound bull driven by an instinct older than human civilization, the instinct to protect the innocent from predators. The medical transport van sat motionless in the desert heat, its air conditioning straining against the 118-degree temperature as Sarah and Jake faced the most important decision of their lives. Through the tinted windows, the Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a moonscape of saguaro cacti, rocky outcroppings, and merciless sun that could kill a healthy adult in hours. Sarah's hands trembled as she reread Steinberg's instructions for the 3rd time, the words blurring through her tears. Leave subjects at designated coordinates. Provide minimal water. Depart immediately. The clinical language couldn't disguise what they were being asked to do: abandon 4 dying children in conditions that would guarantee their deaths within hours. We're already in too deep, Jake muttered, his military training warring with his conscience. If we turn back now, Steinberg will destroy us. He has senators on his payroll, judges in his pocket. We'll be the ones going to prison for kidnapping. In the back of the van, 8-year-old Lily stirred weakly on her stretcher. The leukemia treatments had left her bald and skeletal, but her eyes still held the fierce intelligence that had always made her grandmother proud. Dr. Chen, she whispered, are we almost there? Sarah's heart shattered as she looked at the child who reminded her so much of the boy she'd lost on her operating table 2 years ago. Almost, sweetheart. Try to rest. But Lily's keen instincts, sharpened by months of adult conversations about her condition, picked up on the tension. Something's wrong, isn't it? Sarah couldn't bring herself to lie to those trusting brown eyes. I'm going to make sure you're safe, Lily. I promise. 20 miles behind them, Emma Walsh pushed her horse harder than she ever had before, following Titan's massive hoofprints across terrain that would challenge an experienced desert guide. The Brahman bull had been moving with supernatural determination for 6 hours, pausing only to allow Emma's horse brief water breaks. His usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by an intensity that frightened and amazed her. Emma had grown up on this land, understood its rhythms and dangers. Titan was heading directly toward the most isolated section of the Sonoran Desert, where summer temperatures regularly killed unprepared hikers. No one went there voluntarily. It was a place where the earth itself seemed hostile to life. Her satellite phone crackled with static as she tried to call the sheriff's department. "This is Emma Walsh on Copper Creek Road. I need to report." "Hell, I don't know what to report. My bull is leading me toward Grid 47 Delta, and I think someone might be in trouble out here." The dispatcher's voice was skeptical. "Ma'am, did you say your bull is leading you somewhere?" "I know how it sounds, but Titan's never behaved like this." "He's a Brahman bull, bred for intelligence and heat tolerance. If he's this agitated, there's a reason." Emma's voice cracked with frustration. "Please, just send someone to check Grid 47 Delta." Meanwhile, in the van, Jake had made his decision. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. 7-year-old Amber, who would never understand why Daddy couldn't come home anymore if he went through with this. Some things were worse than prison. Some things were worse than financial ruin. "I can't do it," he said quietly, reaching for the ignition. "I've done terrible things in war, Sarah, but I won't murder children for money." Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. "Thank God. We'll figure something out. We'll say the van broke down, that we got lost." But as Jake turned the key, the engine made a grinding noise and died. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. In the oppressive desert heat, without air conditioning, the metal van would become an oven within minutes. "No, no, no!" Jake frantically tried the ignition again. Nothing. He popped the hood and found that several critical engine components had been sabotaged. Steinberg's insurance policy to prevent exactly this kind of change of heart. Sarah stared at the disabled engine, the horrible realization dawning. He knew. Steinberg knew we might have second thoughts. He made sure we couldn't turn back. The temperature inside the van was already climbing past 95 degrees. Mason's breathing grew more labored, and Grace's heart monitor began beeping erratically. They had perhaps 30 minutes before the heat became fatal for the children. "The radio," Sarah said desperately. "We can call for help." But when Jake checked, the radio had been disabled as well. Their cell phones showed no signal. They were in one of the few remaining dead zones in Arizona where the rocky terrain blocked all communication. Sarah opened the van's rear doors, creating a cross breeze that might buy them precious minutes. She looked at the 4 children who had become her responsibility, their small faces flushed with heat despite their weakened conditions. "What do we do?" Jake asked, sweat already pouring down his face. Before Sarah could answer, a distant rumbling sound caught their attention. On the horizon, a dust cloud was approaching. But it wasn't the rescue vehicles they desperately hoped for. Instead, the dust was being raised by a single massive shape, moving with impossible speed across the desert floor. Titan appeared like something from a fever dream, his black and red-brown coat dark with sweat, his powerful muscles straining as he covered the final mile at a dead run. Behind him, barely visible in the distance, Emma Walsh pushed her exhausted horse to keep pace. The bull slowed as he approached the van, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene, the disabled vehicle, the open doors, the smell of fear and sickness that emanated from within. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the 2,000-pound animal and the two desperate adults stared at each other. Then Titan did something that defied every assumption about animal behavior. He positioned his massive body to cast shade over the van's open doors, creating a patch of blessed coolness in the killing heat. His presence alone dropped the temperature around the children by 15 degrees. "Jesus," Jake breathed. "It's like he knows." Sarah watched in amazement as the bull carefully maneuvered to maximize the shade, his movements deliberate and protective. She'd heard stories about animals exhibiting unusual behavior before natural disasters, but this was different. This was conscious, purposeful action. Emma arrived minutes later. Her horse nearly collapsed from exhaustion. She took in the scene quickly. The abandoned van, the disabled engine, the 4 children inside who were clearly in medical distress, and Titan standing guard like a living shield against the desert sun. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle in her saddle holster. "What are you doing with sick children in the middle of nowhere?" Sarah and Jake exchanged glances, both realizing how their story would sound. "We're medical personnel," Sarah said carefully. "We were transporting these children to a treatment facility when our van broke down." Emma's experienced eye took in the sabotaged engine, the terrified looks on the adults' faces, and the expensive medical equipment that seemed oddly out of place for a simple transport. "What treatment facility?" "There's nothing out here but desert and death." The truth came spilling out of Sarah in a rush of guilt and terror. She told Emma about Steinberg's offer, the fake medical transport, the real coordinates that led to nowhere. She explained about the disabled engine, the blocked communications, and the children who would die if they didn't get help soon. Emma listened with growing horror, her rancher's pragmatism warring with maternal instinct. She'd lost everything to medical bills herself, understood the desperation that could drive people to make terrible choices. But these were children, innocent children who deserved better than to die in the desert for a rich man's twisted sense of justice. "We need to get them out of here," Emma said firmly. "My ranch is 37 miles north. I've got water, shade, and a working radio." But even as she spoke, Emma knew the logistics were impossible. Her horse couldn't carry additional weight, and the children were too sick to travel on horseback even if there were enough mounts. The van was their only shelter, but without air conditioning, it would become a death trap as the temperature continued to climb. That's when Titan made his second impossible decision. The massive bull lay down beside the van, creating an even larger patch of shade while positioning his body to channel any desert breeze toward the children. His presence transformed the space around the van into a microclimate that might sustain life long enough for rescue to arrive. "I've never seen anything like this," Emma whispered, pulling out her satellite phone to try calling for help again. This time the signal was clear. Titan's position had somehow improved the reception. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Emma Walsh. I've got 4 critically ill children stranded in the desert at Grid 47 Delta. We need immediate medical evacuation." The dispatcher's response chilled her blood. "Ma'am, we've had several reports about those coordinates today. Are you aware that area is currently under investigation for a possible kidnapping?" Emma looked at Sarah and Jake, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Kidnapping?" Mrs. Dorothy Wellington reported her 4 grandchildren missing, last seen entering a medical transport van that was supposed to take them to Montana. Sarah closed her eyes, the full weight of her participation in Steinberg's scheme finally hitting her. She'd helped kidnap 4 children from their grandmother, transported them to their intended deaths, and only Titan's intervention had prevented her from becoming an accessory to murder. "Those are the children," Sarah said quietly. "And God help me, I helped take them." As they waited for rescue helicopters that were already scrambling from Phoenix, the 4 adults and 1 extraordinary bull maintained their vigil in the desert heat. Titan never moved from his protective position, even as the temperature peaked at 127 degrees. His massive body absorbed the worst of the sun's punishment, creating a pocket of survival in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Lily's fever spiked dangerously, and Sarah worked frantically with the limited medical supplies in the van to keep her stable. Mason's oxygen levels dropped critically low, forcing Jake to share his own breathing apparatus with the 7-year-old. Grace's heart arrhythmia worsened in the heat, while Noah's kidney failure accelerated to the point where Sarah feared he might not survive another hour. But Titan held his position, a 2,000-pound guardian angel whose presence meant the difference between life and death for 4 innocent children. Emma found herself whispering prayers of gratitude for the bull she'd inherited from her dead husband, never imagining that Tom's final gift would save lives he'd never even known existed. In the distance, the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, carried on the desert wind like the promise of salvation. But even as rescue drew near, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. Someone had planned this carefully, had anticipated their every move. Someone with enough power to sabotage vehicles and block communications would not simply accept defeat. The real battle was just beginning. The thunderous roar of helicopter rotors cut through the desert silence as 3 medical evacuation aircraft descended toward the impossible scene below. Lead pilot Captain Maria Rodriguez had flown rescue missions for 15 years. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of a massive Brahman bull standing protective guard over 4 dying children in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. "Phoenix Control, this is Medevac 1. Rodriguez radioed as she circled the landing zone. "I've got visual on the subjects, confirming 4 pediatric patients in critical condition, 2 adults and, 1 very large bull providing shade coverage." The response crackled through her headset. "Medevac 1, did you say a bull?" "Affirmative. 2,000-pound Brahman, positioned to shield the children from direct sunlight. I've never seen anything like it." As the helicopters touched down, Titan remained motionless despite the chaos of rotor wash and shouting medical personnel. His intelligent eyes tracked the paramedics as they rushed toward the van, but he didn't move from his protective stance until Emma approached and placed a gentle hand on his neck. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "The cavalry's here." Dr. James Morrison, the lead trauma physician, took one look at the children and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Lily's temperature had spiked to 104 degrees, her dehydrated body unable to regulate heat. Mason's oxygen saturation had dropped to dangerous levels, his compromised lungs struggling in the thin desert air. Grace's heart monitor showed irregular rhythms that could prove fatal at any moment, while Noah's kidney failure had progressed to the point where his small body was retaining dangerous levels of toxins. "How long have they been exposed to these temperatures?" Dr. Morrison demanded as his team worked to stabilize the children. "Approximately 4 hours," Sarah answered, her voice heavy with guilt. "The air conditioning failed when the engine was sabotaged." Morrison's experienced eyes caught the word sabotaged immediately. This wasn't an accident? Before Sarah could respond, Detective Ray Harrison's helicopter touched down, dust swirling as the grizzled investigators stepped out into the killing heat. Harrison had been following Dorothy Wellington's case for 3 days, initially dismissing her claims about billionaire kidnapping as the desperate fantasies of a grieving grandmother. The discovery of 4 children abandoned in the desert had transformed his skepticism into focused rage. "Nobody move," Harrison commanded, his hand resting on his weapon as he surveyed the scene. "This is now a crime scene." Emma stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring. These children need immediate medical attention. "Whatever investigation you need to conduct can wait until they're safe." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he took in Emma's defensive posture and Titan's continued presence. "Ma'am, I need to understand how you happened to be in the middle of nowhere at exactly the right time to save 4 kidnapped children." "My bull led me here," Emma said simply, knowing how insane it sounded. "Your bull led you here," Harrison repeated flatly. "Detective," Dr. Morrison interrupted, "these children have minutes, not hours. 2 of them are going into shock, and the third needs immediate cardiac intervention. We can continue this conversation at the hospital." As the medical teams worked to load the children onto stretchers, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She approached Detective Harrison, her hands raised in surrender. "Detective, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I need to confess to my role in what happened here today." Harrison's weathered face showed no surprise. "Dr. Chen, you have the right to remain silent." "I don't want to remain silent," Sarah interrupted. "These children were supposed to die out here today, and I was paid to make it happen." The admission sent shockwaves through the rescue team. Paramedics paused in their work, helicopter crews strained to listen, and Emma felt her blood turn to ice as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Jake Morrison, his military bearing crumbling under the weight of guilt, stepped forward as well. "I was the driver. We were both paid by Richard Steinberg to transport these children to coordinates that led nowhere. The engine was sabotaged to prevent us from changing our minds." Harrison felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. He'd spent 2 days investigating Richard Steinberg's background, finding inconsistencies in the billionaire's charitable donations and suspicious patterns in the Steinberg Foundation's funding decisions. What he'd discovered was a carefully constructed system designed to eliminate children deemed unprofitable while maintaining Steinberg's reputation as a philanthropist. "How much did he pay you?" Harrison asked. "100,000, Sarah whispered. "I lost my medical license 2 years ago. I needed the money to pay legal fees and malpractice settlements. I told myself this was a legitimate medical transport." 50,000, Jake added. "My daughter has autism. The therapy isn't covered by insurance, and I was desperate." Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the confessions with urgent authority. "Detective, we're losing valuable time. These children need to be in surgery within the hour, or we're going to lose them." As the helicopters prepared for takeoff, Emma made an unexpected decision. "I'm coming with them." "Ma'am, there's no room," a paramedic began. "There's room," Emma said firmly. "These children have been abandoned once today. I won't let them wake up in a hospital with no familiar faces." Detective Harrison studied Emma's determined expression, recognizing the fierce protectiveness he'd seen in the best police officers. "Ma'am, you may have saved 4 lives today. The least we can do is get you to the hospital." But as the helicopters lifted off, Harrison's radio crackled with news that changed everything. "Detective Harrison, this is Phoenix Control. We've got a problem. Richard Steinberg's legal team has obtained an emergency injunction blocking any medical treatment for the children until paternity and custody issues are resolved." Harrison's face darkened with rage. "What does that mean in plain English?" "It means those children can't receive surgery, medication, or any non-emergency intervention until the courts sort out who has legal authority to make medical decisions." Dr. Morrison, monitoring the radio frequency, felt his stomach drop. "Detective, these children will die without immediate intervention. Grace needs cardiac surgery within 2 hours. Noah's kidneys are shutting down. This injunction is essentially a death sentence." In the lead helicopter, Emma held Lily's small hand as the 8-year-old drifted in and out of consciousness. The child's fever had begun to break thanks to IV fluids and cooling measures, but her leukemia required immediate treatment that the legal injunction would now prevent. "Emma," Lily whispered weakly, "where's my grandma?" Emma's heart broke as she looked into those trusting brown eyes. "She's waiting for you, sweetheart." She loves you very much." "I know," Lily said, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often showed in the face of impossible circumstances. "She gave us to the rich man so we could get better. But he wasn't really going to help us, was he?" Emma struggled to find words that wouldn't destroy what remained of the child's innocence. "Some people aren't as good as they pretend to be, honey. But there are still good people in the world, and we're going to make sure you get the help you need." As Phoenix Children's Hospital came into view, Detective Harrison was already working his contacts, trying to find a way around Steinberg's legal maneuvering. But with each passing minute, he realized they were fighting against a system designed to protect wealth and power rather than innocent lives. The helicopters touched down on the hospital's helipad where a crowd of medical personnel waited despite the legal injunction. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the hospital's chief of pediatric surgery, met the incoming stretchers with grim determination. "Dr. Warren," one of the hospital administrators called out, "the injunction specifically prohibits any surgical intervention until—" "These children are dying," Dr. Warren interrupted. "I took an oath to do no harm, and watching children die while lawyers argue about paperwork violates that oath in the most fundamental way possible." Emma watched the confrontation with growing dread, realizing that even after surviving the desert, Titan's protection, and the harrowing rescue, the children might still die because of legal technicalities manipulated by their would-be killer. That's when Dorothy Wellington appeared, having driven through the night after hearing about the rescue on the news. The elderly woman pushed through the crowd of medical personnel and administrators, her face etched with 3 days of terror and sleepless nights. "Those are my grandchildren," she declared with a strength that surprised everyone present. "I have legal custody, and I'm authorizing whatever medical treatment they need." But even as Dorothy spoke, security guards approached with legal documents. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but there's an injunction in place. Mr. Steinberg's legal team claims that your consent to the medical transport constitutes abandonment, which nullifies your custody rights." The hospital administrator looked uncomfortable as he explained the legal maze that Steinberg's lawyers had constructed. "Until the courts determine who has legal authority to make medical decisions, we're prohibited from providing anything beyond basic life support." Emma watched the color drain from Dorothy's face as the full scope of Steinberg's evil became clear. The billionaire hadn't just tried to murder 4 children. He'd constructed a legal framework that would allow them to die in a hospital surrounded by doctors who were forbidden to save them. In that moment, Emma made a decision that would change her life forever. She stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Then I guess we'll have to find another way." The sterile corridors of Phoenix Children's Hospital had become a battlefield where legal documents wielded more power than medical expertise. Emma watched in growing horror as 4 dying children lay connected to basic life support, while an army of lawyers prevented the very doctors who could save them from acting. The injunction had transformed the pediatric ICU into a mausoleum where hope went to die. Dorothy Wellington sat beside Lily's bed, her weathered hand stroking her granddaughter's fevered forehead as the 8-year-old's condition deteriorated. The child's leukemia was advancing rapidly, her compromised immune system unable to fight the desert exposure and dehydration. Every hour that passed without treatment brought her closer to the point of no return. "Grandma," Lily whispered through cracked lips, "why won't the doctors help us?" Dorothy's voice broke as she tried to explain the inexplicable. "There are some very bad people trying to stop the good doctors from helping you, baby girl. But we're going to find a way." In the next bed, Mason's breathing grew increasingly labored despite the ventilator assistance. His 7-year-old lungs, already damaged by genetic defects, were failing under the stress of his ordeal. "Doctor." Elizabeth Warren stood beside his bed, her hands clenched in frustration as she watched a child die while possessing all the tools necessary to save him. "This is obscene," Dr. Warren muttered to her colleague. We could perform emergency surgery on all 4 children and have them stable within 6 hours. Instead, we're forced to watch them die because a billionaire's lawyers found a legal loophole. Detective Ray Harrison had spent the past 4 hours on the phone with judges, prosecutors, and anyone else who might have the authority to override Steinberg's injunction. Each call ended in frustration as legal technicalities and jurisdictional complications created an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy. "Judge Martinez, these children will be dead by morning if we don't act," Harrison pleaded into his phone. "Surely the court can see that this injunction is being used as a weapon." The judge's response was sympathetic but legally powerless. "Detective, I understand the urgency, but Steinberg's legal team has filed this in federal court, claiming interstate commerce violations. Until the federal judge rules tomorrow morning, my hands are tied." Emma had been pacing the hospital corridors for hours, her mind racing for solutions that didn't exist within the legal system. She'd called every contact she had, ranchers, local politicians, even her late husband's military buddies, but none of them possessed the kind of influence needed to move federal courts in a matter of hours. That's when she remembered Titan, still standing vigil in the hospital parking lot where she'd insisted he be allowed to stay. The massive bull had refused to leave, positioning himself near the building's entrance as if maintaining his protective watch over the children inside. Hospital security had initially tried to remove him, but the story of his desert rescue had already gone viral on social media, creating public pressure to let him remain. Emma found Titan surrounded by a growing crowd of supporters who had gathered after seeing the news coverage. Reporters, protesters, and concerned citizens had created an impromptu vigil in the parking lot, their signs demanding justice and medical care for the abandoned children. "This is America," one elderly protester shouted to a news camera. "We don't let children die because some rich man wants to play God with the legal system." Sarah Chen stood near the back of the crowd, her confession to Detective Harrison having made her both a pariah and a reluctant hero. The media had seized on her story of being paid to transport children to their deaths, but public opinion was split between condemnation for her participation and sympathy for her ultimate decision to confess. "Dr. Chen," a reporter thrust a microphone toward her, "do you believe Richard Steinberg intended for these children to die?" Sarah's voice was steady despite her tears. "There's no question about his intentions. He paid us to abandon 4 terminally ill children in 127-degree heat with minimal water. That's not negligence. That's premeditated murder." Inside the hospital, Grace's heart monitor began showing dangerous arrhythmias. The 6-year-old's congenital heart defect, exacerbated by dehydration and stress, was pushing her tiny body beyond its limits. Dr. Warren watched the readouts with growing desperation, knowing that Grace needed immediate cardiac intervention to survive the night. "How long until the federal court ruling?" she asked the hospital administrator. "Best case scenario, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. More likely, sometime tomorrow afternoon." Dr. Warren looked at her watch, 11:47 p.m. "Grace wouldn't survive another 8 hours, let alone 18. Then we need to find another option." Noah's condition had deteriorated to the point where his kidney failure was affecting his brain function. The 5-year-old drifted in and out of consciousness, his small body swollen with toxins that should have been filtered out by functioning kidneys. Dorothy held his hand while silently praying for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely. At midnight, Emma made a phone call that would change everything. She contacted Rebecca Martinez, an investigative journalist who had been following Richard Steinberg's business practices for over a year. Martinez had uncovered a pattern of suspicious deaths among children who had received initial funding from the Steinberg Foundation, only to have their support mysteriously withdrawn when their conditions worsened. "Rebecca, this is Emma Walsh. You don't know me, but I have information about Richard Steinberg that you need to hear." Martinez listened as Emma detailed the events of the past 24 hours, the planned abandonment, Titan's intervention, the legal injunction designed to ensure the children's deaths even after their rescue. As Emma spoke, Martinez cross-referenced the story with her own research, finding connections that painted a picture of systematic elimination of unprofitable patients. "Emma, what you're describing fits a pattern I've been tracking for months. Steinberg's foundation has a secret policy of withdrawing support from children with less than a 20% survival rate, but this is the first time I have witnesses and documentary evidence of attempted murder." At 1:23 a.m., Martinez published a story that ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Social media exploded with #SaveThe4 hashtags, while celebrities and politicians demanded immediate action. The story was picked up by major networks, and by 2:00 a.m. it was trending nationally. But Richard Steinberg was not defenseless. His team of crisis management specialists and legal experts had prepared for this possibility. They launched a coordinated counter-narrative, portraying Steinberg as a victim of extortion and claiming that the children had been kidnapped by a conspiracy of desperate medical professionals seeking to damage his reputation. Mr. Steinberg is heartbroken by this attempt to use dying children as weapons against his charitable work, his spokesman announced to a hastily assembled press conference. The legal injunction exists solely to ensure that proper custody and medical authority are established before any irreversible procedures are performed. The war for public opinion raged throughout the night, but inside the hospital, the children's conditions continued to deteriorate. Grace flatlined twice, requiring emergency resuscitation that pushed the boundaries of what was legally permissible under the injunction. Mason's oxygen levels dropped so low that Dr. Warren made the decision to intubate him, arguing that failure to do so would constitute malpractice. At 3:45 a.m., Dorothy Wellington made a decision born of desperation and maternal love. She gathered the small crowd of supporters who had maintained vigil in the hospital lobby and addressed them with the authority of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "My grandchildren are dying while lawyers argue about paperwork," she announced, her voice carrying through the hushed space. "Richard Steinberg tried to murder them once. Now he's using the courts to finish the job. If the system won't protect innocent children, then maybe it's time to go around the system." Her words resonated with people who had watched the legal maneuvering with growing frustration. Parents thought about their own children. Grandparents remembered the promises they'd made to protect the next generation. And medical professionals struggled with oaths that demanded action while laws demanded inaction. As dawn approached, the battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side stood Richard Steinberg with his legal team, political connections, and vast wealth. On the other side stood a dying children, a desperate grandmother, a woman with a protective bull, and a growing army of ordinary people who had decided that some things were more important than legal technicalities. The question was whether justice could prevail before the children paid the ultimate price for one man's twisted vision of evolutionary selection. Outside, Titan remained motionless in the parking lot, his presence a constant reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in courtrooms, but in the hearts of those who refuse to let evil triumph over innocence. At 4:17 a.m., as Grace's heart monitor flatlined for the third time in 2 hours, Dr. Elizabeth Warren made a decision that would either save her career or destroy it completely. She looked at the child's blue lips, her tiny chest that had stopped rising and falling, and threw 25 years of legal compliance out the window. "I'm calling it," she announced to the stunned nursing staff. "This child is dying in front of us, and I took an oath to do no harm. Watching her die while I have the ability to save her violates that oath." The head nurse, Patricia Gomez, had worked with Dr. Warren for 15 years and recognized the steel in her voice. "Doctor, the injunction? The injunction doesn't supersede medical necessity in life or death situations." Dr. Warren interrupted as she began emergency cardiac procedures. "If Steinberg wants to sue me for saving a child's life, let him try explaining that to a jury." Word of Dr. Warren's defiance spread through the hospital like wildfire. Other physicians began quietly preparing for their own acts of medical rebellion, while administrators frantically called lawyers and hospital board members. The pediatric ICU had become ground zero for a confrontation between legal bureaucracy and medical ethics. In the parking lot, Emma stood beside Titan as the massive bull seemed to sense the crisis unfolding inside the building. His dark eyes were fixed on the hospital's upper floors where the children lay dying, and his powerful body trembled with an agitation that made Emma's skin crawl. "I know, boy," she whispered, running her hands along his neck. "They're still in danger, aren't they?" At that moment, Rebecca Martinez's investigative team made a discovery that would shatter Richard Steinberg's carefully constructed legal defense. While reviewing financial records obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, they uncovered a pattern of payments that revealed the true scope of his operation. Martinez called Emma at 4:32 a.m. with news that changed everything. "Emma, we found the smoking gun. Steinberg has been systematically eliminating sick children for 3 years. We have documentation of payments to transport companies, medical personnel, and even judges who've ruled in his favor." The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Bank records showed payments totaling $2.7 million to various accomplices over 36 months. Insurance fraud investigators discovered that Steinberg had been collecting life insurance policies on children who received his foundation's initial support, then arranging their deaths to collect the payouts while maintaining his charitable reputation. "How many children?" Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. 23 confirmed deaths, probably more, all ruled accidental or natural causes during medical transport. Grace, Lily, Mason, and Noah were meant to be numbers 24 through 27. As the sun rose over Phoenix, the hospital had become the center of a media circus. News vans filled every available parking space, reporters interviewed anyone willing to speak, and protesters demanding justice for the children created a continuous presence outside the main entrance. Dorothy Wellington emerged from the hospital at 6:15 a.m. to address the growing crowd. Her face showed the ravages of 3 sleepless nights, but her voice carried the strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "My grandchildren are fighting for their lives upstairs," she announced, her words carrying clearly in the morning air. "One man's greed and twisted sense of superiority has brought us to this moment." Richard Steinberg looked at 4 sick children and saw expenses to be eliminated rather than lives to be saved. The crowd's angry murmur grew louder as Dorothy continued. "The system that's supposed to protect children has been turned into a weapon against them. If the courts won't act, if the politicians won't act, then maybe it's time for the people to act." Her words resonated with a crowd that included parents, grandparents, medical professionals, and ordinary citizens who had been following the story with growing outrage. Signs appeared reading, "Children over profit," and "Justice for the 4," while chants of "Save the Children" echoed off the hospital walls. Inside, Dr. Warren's rebellion had inspired others. Dr. Michael Rodriguez began preparing Mason for emergency lung surgery despite the legal restrictions, while Dr. Sarah Kim worked frantically to stabilize Noah's kidney function. The pediatric ICU had become a zone of medical civil disobedience, where doctors chose their Hippocratic oath over legal compliance. At 7:45 a.m., as hospital administrators threatened to call security to stop the unauthorized procedures, Detective Ray Harrison received a phone call that changed the entire dynamic of the case. Detective Harrison, this is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI. We've been monitoring the Steinberg situation based on Rebecca Martinez's investigation. We have federal warrants for Richard Steinberg's arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering. Harrison felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. Agent Walsh, we have children dying in the hospital while Steinberg's lawyers prevent treatment. How quickly can you move? We're moving now. Federal agents are currently surrounding Steinberg's compound. The injunction will be lifted within the hour once we have him in custody. But Richard Steinberg had not built a billion-dollar empire without anticipating potential threats. His security team had been monitoring law enforcement communications, and he had already activated his escape plan. Private jets waited at 3 different airports, each fueled and ready for immediate departure to non-extradition countries. At 8:23 a.m., as FBI agents stormed his empty mansion, Steinberg was already airborne from a private airstrip 40 miles outside Phoenix. His destination was a country with no extradition treaty and a government that could be bought with sufficient funds. However, Steinberg had underestimated the power of social media and public outrage. His escape attempt had been captured by news helicopters, and within minutes, his flight path was being tracked by aviation enthusiasts and law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The image of a billionaire fleeing justice while 4 children fought for their lives became a symbol of everything wrong with wealth inequality in America. At 8:47 a.m., Federal Judge Patricia Morrison lifted Steinberg's injunction, citing overwhelming evidence of fraudulent legal proceedings designed to facilitate murder. The words had barely left her lips before Dr. Warren was wheeling Grace into emergency cardiac surgery. The surgical procedures that followed would be remembered as some of the most emotionally charged operations in the hospital's history. Dr. Warren worked for 6 hours to repair Grace's damaged heart, while Dr. Rodriguez performed a double lung transplant on Mason, using organs that had become available from a donor family inspired by the children's story. Lily's leukemia treatment began immediately, with bone marrow donors from around the country volunteering to help. Noah's emergency dialysis stabilized his condition enough for a kidney transplant that would come from Dorothy herself, who insisted on being tested for compatibility. "Those children are all I have left in this world," Dorothy told the transplant coordinator. "If my old kidneys can save my grandson, then that's how I want to be remembered." Emma maintained her vigil in the parking lot with Titan, watching the constant flow of medical personnel, reporters, and well-wishers. The massive bull had become a symbol of the story, his protective instincts representing the kind of unconditional love that had been missing from Richard Steinberg's calculated world. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Warren emerged from surgery with news that Grace's operation had been successful. The 6-year-old's repaired heart was beating strongly, and her prognosis for a full recovery was excellent. Similar reports followed throughout the afternoon as each child's condition stabilized and began to improve. But the victory felt incomplete as long as Richard Steinberg remained free. His private jet had disappeared from radar over international waters, and intelligence agencies were working frantically to track his movements. The man who had tried to murder 4 children was still at large, his vast wealth providing resources that most criminals could never access. That evening, as Dorothy sat beside her recovering grandchildren, she received an unexpected visitor. Emma Walsh knocked softly on the hospital room door, her weathered hands carrying a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. "Mrs. Wellington, my name is Emma Walsh. My bull Titan was the one who found your grandchildren in the desert." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the woman who had played such a crucial role in saving her family. "Miss Walsh, I don't know how to thank you. If you and Titan hadn't been there..." "We were meant to be there," Emma said simply. "Sometimes I think Tom sent Titan to me for this exact purpose. My husband died 2 years ago, and I've been so angry, so lost. But maybe this is why I was supposed to keep going." The two women sat together in comfortable silence, watching 4 children sleep peacefully for the first time in days. Outside their window, Titan stood in the parking lot like a faithful guardian, his presence a reminder that heroes come in all forms. The battle for justice was far from over, but the children were safe. And sometimes, in a world full of cruelty and indifference, that was enough to restore faith in the possibility of good triumphing over evil. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Emma Walsh's ranch house, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine during those desperate hours in the desert. 4 children's voices filled the kitchen with laughter as they helped Dorothy prepare breakfast, their healthy complexions and boundless energy standing as living testimony to the power of second chances. Lily, now 9 and cancer-free after successful bone marrow treatment, stood on a step stool teaching 5-year-old Noah how to flip pancakes. Her hair had grown back in soft brown curls, and the sparkle in her eyes had returned stronger than ever. "Careful, Noah. Grandma says cooking is like medicine. You have to get the measurements exactly right." Mason, whose new lungs had given him the gift of effortless breathing, chased his sister Grace around the expanded kitchen table that Emma had built to accommodate their growing family. Grace's repaired heart beat strong and steady, powering adventures that would have been impossible just months before. Dorothy Wellington, whose successful kidney donation to Noah had left her slightly weakened but immeasurably fulfilled, moved slowly but contentedly around the kitchen she now shared with Emma. The two women had formed an unexpected bond forged in crisis and strengthened by their shared commitment to the children's welfare. "Emma, honey, would you call Titan in for breakfast?" Dorothy asked, her voice carrying the warm authority of a grandmother who had found her purpose again. "He's been standing guard over that new calf all morning." Outside, Titan grazed peacefully in the expanded pasture that now housed several rescue animals, a legacy of the donations that had poured in after their story became national news. The massive Brahman bull had become something of a celebrity, featured in children's books about heroism and featured in documentaries about the bond between humans and animals. Emma stepped onto the porch, marveling at how dramatically her life had changed. The insurance settlement from Richard Steinberg's seized assets had allowed her to expand the ranch, creating a therapeutic facility where sick children could visit and interact with animals during their recovery. The Titan's Haven program had become a model for animal-assisted therapy programs across the country. "Come on, boy," Emma called to Titan, who looked up from his protective stance over the young calf. "Breakfast time." The bull's intelligent eyes met hers with the same depth of understanding that had guided him through the desert 6 months ago. He approached slowly, as he always did around the children, his massive frame somehow conveying gentleness and protection simultaneously. Richard Steinberg's international manhunt had ended 3 months earlier when he was arrested in Switzerland, attempting to access frozen bank accounts. The extradition process had been swift, and his trial was scheduled to begin in federal court the following month. 23 families had come forward seeking justice for their children, who had died under suspicious circumstances linked to Steinberg's foundation. Detective Ray Harrison visited regularly, bringing updates on the case and enjoying the simple pleasure of seeing the children thrive. He had requested a transfer to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, dedicating his remaining years in law enforcement to preventing similar tragedies. Dr. Sarah Chen had completed her community service and regained her medical license, but chose to practice at the small rural clinic near Emma's ranch. Her experience in the desert had taught her that true healing sometimes happened far from gleaming hospital corridors, in places where human connection mattered more than expensive equipment. As the family gathered around the breakfast table, Dorothy led them in the simple grace she had taught them. "For the food we're about to receive, for the love that surrounds us, and for the guardian angels, both human and otherwise, who watch over us, we are truly grateful." Titan's low rumble from the porch seemed to echo their gratitude, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come disguised as ordinary love. Emma looked around the table at the faces that had become her world. 4 children who had survived the unthinkable, a grandmother whose strength had never wavered, and a community that had rallied around them. In the distance, she could hear more families arriving for the day's therapy sessions, bringing their own stories of struggle and hope. The ranch that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter, proof that even the darkest chapters can lead to the brightest endings when good people refuse to give up on each other. Outside, Titan settled into his favorite spot, where he could watch over them all, a faithful guardian whose extraordinary heart had saved more than 4 lives. It had restored faith in the enduring power of love over evil. Sometimes life feels like we're standing in our own desert, watching everything we've worked for slip away while the world moves on without us. Maybe it's watching medical bills pile up, feeling forgotten by family, or wondering if our years of sacrifice meant anything at all. Dorothy Wellington knew that feeling, a 68-year-old grandmother facing impossible choices, counting her last $15 while her grandchildren needed millions in medical care. But here's what Dorothy discovered, and what Titan the bull somehow understood. The greatest miracles don't come from wealth or power, they come from ordinary people who refuse to give up on love. When the system failed, when the rich and powerful turned their backs, it was a community of everyday heroes. A lonely rancher, a guilt-ridden doctor, a determined detective who stepped forward. They proved that your worth isn't measured by your bank account or your age, but by your willingness to protect what matters most. At 55, 60, or 68, you're not forgotten. You're not worthless. You're exactly the kind of person who can still change everything for someone who needs hope. Sometimes the biggest hearts come in the most unexpected packages, including yours. Questions for you. What moment in your life reminded you that age brings wisdom, not weakness? Have you ever been someone's Titan, their unexpected guardian angel, without even realizing it? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.